Okay, and we're back. So, part 8 of 30, Abolition for the People, a series of essays by Kaepernick Publishing. This one is called How Abolition Makes Schools Safer, and it talks to the school-to-prison pipeline. It was written by Kihana Maria Ross, a professor of African American Studies at the Weinberg College of Arts and Sciences. She's written a few books, which probably warrant looking at. Let's see. I'll get some links posted into the Discord, but things like she actually has a book, like Call It What It Is, Anti-Blackness, and Black Space in Education, On Black Education, Anti-Blackness Refusal, and Resistance in Grant. So, yeah. That's just some background for the author. I like to try and give that. Hey, wizards. What did you just walk? What do you mean? Okay, so there we go. No, didn't mean to type that. Fair enough. How abolition makes schools safer. Also, before I start getting into this, this is kind of intended as a open discussion type format, so feel free to jump in anytime with comments, questions, what have you. I'll be interrupting at points to kind of give my own thoughts on things as well, but gotcha. Funneling our children from classrooms to cages ends now. I was 16 years old, stopped at a red light the first time I saw sirens flashing in my rearview mirror. Stomach tight, breath stifled, and heart pounding, I looked over at my friend in the passenger seat. The same terror trying to close my throat stared back at me through his eyes. I could hear a muffled voice over a loudspeaker telling me to pull over. Instead, I hit the gas, bolting through the red light and racing down the street. My friend yelled at me, "What are you doing? Pull over." I didn't know what I was doing. It didn't make logical sense. All I knew was we were in immediate danger and I had to get away. But my friend was right. Escape was impossible. My barely running old-school Tercels horsepower was no match for a police cruiser. And capture after a chase was even more dangerous. I pulled over, I rolled down my window, and as the cop quickly approached demanding an answer, I got scared, I said, "I'm sorry." While I've since learned how to navigate the constricting terror I feel when I see flashing lights behind me, this hasn't changed despite nearly 3 decades in a professorship at a prestigious university. Hey, Donnie. Yeah, you just missed the start. That's okay. It was just the first, opening paragraph. You're in plenty of time. I want to be clear that this panic isn't limited to when we recognize the shape of a police car in our rearview mirror. It isn't limited to the myriad of other activities people racialized as black are brutalized for, such as walking or swinging or singing or laughing or playing, watching television or sleeping or breathing. It is also something many of our babies feel as they walk into their schools, sit in the classrooms, as they navigate hallways between classes. It is what happens when you feel your body tighten as you realize cops are not in schools to protect you. They are there to protect schools from you. It's an interesting distinction. Beyond the ways this understanding manifests in our bodies, the relationship between black children and the school's larger disciplinary structure is clear. Both principals and teachers in U.S. public schools are over 80% white, and nearly 70% of police in schools are white. Regardless of the discipliner's gender, the majority of teachers and principals are women, and the majority of police in schools are men. Black students from pre-K to 12th grade are overrepresented in every form of discipline, from teacher-issued referrals to corporal punishments to suspensions, expulsions, and police arrests. As an anecdote, I want to pull an aside that this is actually something that I did observe at my high school when I moved from. So I attended both a private and a public high school at different periods. The private school was almost all white because that's what private school is for. It's modern day segregation, so you don't have to hang out with the poors, meaning not white people. The education wasn't any better. In public school, though, I did notice what's being observed here, that two students could do the exact same thing. They could even be doing the exact same thing at the exact same time. And very frequently, it would only be the black student who got in trouble for it. Yeah. Even black toddlers in preschool, as young as 3 years old, are disproportionately sent out of the classroom, suspended, and expelled. What they can look forward to as they enter elementary school are cops who think they're old enough to be arrested. Kaya Roll, a 6-year-old girl in Florida, was handcuffed, placed in the back of a police cruiser, and taken to a juvenile detention facility simply for throwing a tantrum in class. By the time her grandmother had become aware of what happened, young Kaya had already had her mugshot taken and fingerprints recorded. A tantrum. 6 years old. I mean, that's part of the job of dealing with students at that grade. Like, sometimes they throw tantrums. That's the age they are. But, yeah. I remember reading about that. Go figure it, what happened in my state. The thing also about juvenile facility is it creates a record for you, an actual criminal record. It isn't like just a disciplinary action that was taken by the school. It puts you on the police record, or it puts you on the police radar, basically. And that never goes away. 6 years old, hopscotch jumper. I don't remember what county it happened. Let me double check that. Orlando. Yeah, Orlando. So literally less than an hour from me. Yeah. And she was famously, tearfully pleading, "Help me, help me," as they were. Yeah, there's body cam footage. It's not great to look at. And this wasn't like years ago. This was 2020, last year. Yeah, 6 years old. Hopscotch, jump rope, mud pies, years old. Let that sink in. I do, like, that is a really good thing to stick on. Like, if you just think about a 6-year-old, they do that. They throw tantrums. You just handle them. You work through it. Arresting them is not going to help. It's not going to make them better. It's certainly not going to calm them down. Like, you see that sort of thing happen in grocery stores and family gatherings. It's part of being that age. Sure, some people are more well-behaved than others, but it's just something that happens. Kaya is only one of thousands of black students harassed, assaulted, and arrested in schools every year. The very beginning of a school-to-prison pipeline that, through a system of discipline and marginalization, feeds children directly into the carceral system. Perhaps even more terrifying, however, is the fact that these experiences are too often normalized as part of black students' reality in schools. Having learned early on about the unrelenting violence police unleash on those racialized black, these children enter schools with survival sensibilities based on a recognition of how police see them, and what this means for how they necessarily must see police. In fact, black students are most likely to report not feeling any safer with an officer on campus, and least likely to agree with positive statements about the police in their schools. As a part of my own ethnographic work with black high school girls, I interviewed students extensively about their experiences in schools, including with school police. One of my students remarked, "We're a target, and they see us as a threat, so you know we see them as a threat." If the police are threatened by blackness more broadly, this signals the impossibility of a protective relationship between the police as a structure and black people as human beings. And this is super targeted at the situation of black children in schools, but it is part of the larger pattern that we've been talking about on this channel about how a police officer cannot possibly impartially meet justice and serve a community and protect that community if it first views that community as an imminent threat, as an enemy that must be subjugated. It is definitely something that that black people feel excessively, but it also is part of a larger pattern of policing in the United States. And they view communities as problems that they haven't seen yet, that they're just watching, waiting to take people down, rather than trying to facilitate a healthy, safe community. It's that warrior training thing kicking in. Students also shared numerous stories of their own negative interactions with police. Students discussed being followed, male family members being called the N-word, having guns put to their heads as children during raids of their homes, and being fondled inappropriately during unprovoked searches at school. Their own experiences and the experiences of black people en masse led students to believe that police were against them, and that police would either be unnecessarily brutal or unhelpful, and certainly non-protective in the event their assistance may have been needed. As a reminder, sexual assault remains the most underreported crime in America, for exactly this sort of reason. It is especially carried out against people who the assaulter knows that the victim is in no position to report it, whether they don't have the power or don't have the clout, or otherwise literally cannot interact with police without, antagonism being leveled at them. And how fucked up is that about the guns being aimed at children's heads during raids of the homes? Like, yeah. That is definitely not gonna help anything. That is not de-escalation techniques. You hear about it enough that it's not shocking anymore. I know that it's not shocking, but it needs to be rejected as... Like, it's been normalized, but it needs to just be rejected. It can't be accepted as something law enforcement can do. That was something even that data scientist here in Florida, when her house was raided, and this was the one who was actually trying to report the real COVID numbers in Florida, and the police raided her house, ransacked things, seized her computer, also aimed guns at her and her children. Don't pull that gun unless you intend to use it. They are always pulling their guns and then wondering, how did a situation get out of control? Well, survival instinct is a really strong thing. And if you have 5 guys all like with lethal weapons drawn, screaming orders, often contradictory, the situations are going to get out of hand real fast. They don't de-escalate. Another one of my students commented, I feel like police officers show different feelings towards black people when they would like, let me try this again. I feel like police officers show different feelings towards black people than they would to a normal, like, white person. A normal white person. While this student's words speak for themselves, I want to emphasize the way in which she understands police, to be able to see the humanity in white people. Look, a normal person, while they look at black people differently. This student understands that for police, black people are not quite normal. They are something else entirely. Just to pause on this paragraph. A frequent defense by, of course, by conservatives, but also by liberals, is this notion that that this is, simply not true, that the black student here maybe is just biased in how they see things or what have you. But even if you do not believe that police see things this way, the perception, the fact that a black student can develop that perception is problem enough, because perceptions do matter. Yeah, garlic. Exactly. We've returned to Earth from the rim. In the same way that even if police were genuinely trying to protect and serve, and yet the community they were protecting and serving perceived them as a threat that could not be trusted, that in and of itself makes it impossible for that police officer to fulfill their job. Because you cannot hold that relationship. You can't cultivate it. Yeah, exactly. Customer service teaches this very well. Perceptions are reality. Of course, the reality is many officers, if not all of them, do look at black people differently. But I wanted to address that even if you don't believe that, the fact that the perception exists is problem enough, and it is not being addressed. It is precisely this inability to recognize black humanity that permeates students' broader anti-black experiences in schools. Indeed, anti-blackness in education is not simply about the ways black students are disproportionately punished by teachers, administrators, and actual gun-toting police officers. It is also about the ways black students are policed more broadly. The attacks against our hair and locks, braids, and even the afros that grow naturally from our heads. The ways black girls are hypersexualized and dress-coded disproportionately. The way black boys' bodies are adultified and rendered criminal black man. The ways LGBTQ and gender non-binary black students are erased, marginalized, and othered. The way our bodies, our skin, our hair, our clothes, voice, body language, our cadence, and minds have always represented a dangerous intrusion within educational institutions structured by anti-black solidarity. It is about the policing of the boundaries of our existence, the way our very presence, let alone our struggle, brilliance, our creativity, and ingenuity are misrepresented and or effectively stamped out of the curriculum and denied space in schools more broadly. There's a litany of things here that I didn't notice at the time, but looking back can recognize. In particular, this stuff about the hair stuck out to me quite a bit. Throughout school, these hairstyles were very frequently disparaged, looked down on, and frequently associated with delinquent behavior. Just having the hairstyle made someone suspicious. This also was true in the public school that I attended. Again, the private school really didn't have black people. But black girls were very much perceived as being more sexually promiscuous, even when there was no evidence to back it up. And the promiscuity of white girls consequently was just overlooked or ignored. Nothing wrong with being promiscuous, but just there was just a weird perception about that that was, again, just used to look down on people. And the problem with how even a like 12-year-old black boy is often viewed as larger, more threatening, more physically capable than they actually are, and certainly more so than a white person of the exact same age and the exact same build. It's a disheartening trend, and it extends, because it exists in a lot of the structure of schooling, it gets indoctrinated into those attending the school. I myself took on some implicit biases through my schooling and my upbringing that I've had to unravel and deprogram from this sort of thing. And like, it goes to that thing that racism is not a natural thing. It is very much a taught thing, and there are structures in place to teach it generation after generation. PBS documentary where organizers were trying to get the resource officers out of schools needs to happen. Even those schools which have a resource officer, it doesn't actually prevent school shootings from happening. And that's the reason that people say that they're necessary. It doesn't actually deter it, though, as we're seeing the installation of... We've started installing resource officers all over the place, and the number of school shootings has not been meaningfully lowered. So if it doesn't work, and it's resulting in students just getting arrested and harassed at school, and even, like, sexually harassed in school, why continue doing it? Isn't what hard to determine now? Yeah, that was something that was mentioned a little bit earlier in the article, is there are, in her interviews, in writing a book and studying this, speaking with several black children about their interactions with the on-campus police, many of them reported being inappropriately touched during spontaneous searches. So yeah, that's a thing that is happening. The other thing, just, if you think about it tactically for a moment, it really doesn't work, because most of the time a school shooter is someone who attends the school. The school shooter would know exactly who this resource officer was and would either begin their activity away from them or take them down. When did they start the program with officers? A while back. It was before COVID. Let's see. And we don't have them in all schools, but it looks like it's been increasing since the mid-1970s. And really increased significantly in 2008. And so we've been adding more and more and more cops to schools over years. And we continue to see more and more school shootings. So it looks like major spikes were in 1994 and 2008 in cops being installed in schools. So we have plenty of data points about that. Yeah, yeah. So they were initially just cops in schools. I'm doing a little bit of reading on the fly about the SRO system, so you'll have to give me some leniency if I'm not 100% accurate on some of these. But it looks like there was a cops in school grant program in the 90s, which pushed 6,500 SROs into cops, which were pointedly armed. Yeah. So interestingly, since we're on this tangent, it looks like the Toronto District School Board attempted it in 2008. They installed SROs in some of their schools, but by 2017, they voted to eliminate it because it was proven, at least in their data, to not be effective and to only be creating more escalation and more hostility in schools. So, in Canada's estimation, it was creating more problems than it was solving. Also, hi Jane. Yeah, same year as the crime bill, Garlic. I also, sorry, it is a little bit of a tangent, but it's also very relevant to what we're talking about. I find it very interesting that in the 1970s, okay, so this is a little bit of history, an interesting one. 1970s. It predates it. 1953 was the first instance of an SRO. They kept trickling in. Their primary function was to focus on mentorship and education to help to help out and basically be a role model, take, problem students and kind of talk to them and be their buddy and try and be a positive influence and try and suss out any trouble that they're having at school and stuff. That's what the school resource officer was. Interestingly, in the 1970s, the role of the SRO changed towards crime prevention and law enforcement. Now, that 1970s thing keeps coming up over and over and over again. We keep seeing that. That is when we saw union busting. That's when we saw the rise of SWAT and the obsession with militarizing the police. This 1970s time frame it keeps coming up over and over and over again. It's also when, we saw this rise of law and order type candidates and the libertarian laissez-faire capitalism, like Ayn Randian type stuff. There's a lot of, there were the race riots in the schools in the 70s. So you could say that because of the move towards desegregation, the bleed over of police, which were already trying to crack down on the black population as much as they could, they just took that to the schools as well. So I think it's something that's a little bit unique to the United States because it's following the civil rights era, like Jane kind of pointed out there. Civil rights movement kicks off. We get the Voting Rights Act. everyone's pissed off because now they have to share space with people who don't look like them. How do they react? Start busting skulls in school. You know? How the 1970s. So, like, civil rights era, it was 1968 when we finally got things kind of resolved. Not resolved, but when there was actually a landmark legislation. So 1970s is exactly the time frame that would blow up. And backlash would start occurring. That's when we also saw the war on drugs kick off. And we've talked about what that was all about and how it was framed and how it was carried out, and still is. So, yeah. I'm not saying that everything was perfect before then, but there's a lot of stuff that seemed to get really bad through the 70s and continued on those tracks. Okay. Well, let's see. Let's get back into this. Sorry. It was a good tangent, though. It was a very good tangent. Well, I mean, not really a tangent. It's very related to this article. So while the decades-long fight led by students, parents, activists, and organizations alike to abolish police in schools is perhaps more readily understandable, we must also be calling for the abolition of policing in schools more broadly. The abolition of policies, practices, and structures that facilitate and support the narrative that black students are a problem. The abolition of a system that uses our tax dollars to wield both tasers and textbooks against us. The abolition of the pipeline that funnels our babies from classrooms to cages. Renowned black feminist activist and scholar Angela Y. Davis, who we've read an essay from earlier in this segment, recently remarked that abolition is really about rethinking the kind of future we want. What we want is for schools and classrooms to be spaces of love. Not just a love for the Harlem Renaissance or civil rights movement, but love for loud colors and loud voices. Love for sagging pants, hoodies, and corner store candies. Love for gold grills and belly laughs on hot summer porches. We want schools to be sites of struggle, to engage with black folks' historical and contemporary yearning to be at peace. To seek refuge from an anti-black world where black children can dream weightless, unracialized, and human. Where language flows freely, where existence is nurtured and resistance is breath. Where the black educational imagination dances wildly into the night, quenching the thirst of yearning and giving birth to becoming. Kind of, Danny. Let's see. So, tasers and textbooks? Yeah. So, obviously, like, the tasers is a mention of what's actually being used to subdue them. But textbooks is an interesting line there, I agree. And I could be wrong in this interpretation, but I interpret that as our continued refusal in our education system to actually teach something other than the white imperialist perspective of American history and of the world in general. We, in our education curriculum, have a tendency to stick on American exceptionalism and really gloss over some of the reality of Black experiences and Native American experiences. I understand they're heavy subjects. Kids are able to understand heavy subjects, though, and continuing to deny our past is not a way to learn from it, you know? Texas does have an inordinate influence over textbooks around the country. Yeah, it was a really good article, for sure. The thing with gang violence, I know there was fear of gang violence, but that kicked off the Gun-Free Schools Act in 1994, and I was in school at that time. I'm sure that gangs existed, but I didn't see any of them. I really think a lot of that was just this... Like, Bill Clinton did a lot of stuff to really ramp up police presences. He did that one bill that put like 100,000 more people on cops on the street and stuff. It was kind of part of a broader get more cops everywhere effort. So I'm skeptical of if there was a significant surge in so-called gang violence at that time, more so than any other time. And I would question the effects of it, if it actually assisted meaningfully. Yeah. That would be something that I would need to read more about to speak authoritatively on, but yeah. Dems definitely wanted to look tough on crime at that time. That was a really big policy of the Clinton era. Because at the time, police were enjoying a lot of popularity. You know, the whole propaganda stuff was in full swing. So... I don't know. Like I said, anecdotally, I didn't see any meaningful amount of, like, gang activity when I was in school. I was in school at that time. Yeah, Biden did help us in that. I am hopeful, because it sounds like there are things that are in motion to start putting at least some checks on police power under this administration. Like, Biden as a senator in the past and even as a vice president was seemingly much more to the right than he is now. And I think that's part of a pattern of Biden. You know, let me go ahead and just shift this. Actually, yeah, if we're going to start talking about Biden, let me go ahead and just do a sign off on this so we can cut it for YouTube. So yeah, That was How Abolition Makes Schools Safer. That is part 8 of 30 in the Abolition for the People series by Kaepernick Publishing. We've got a lot more of these to go. Learn something every time. So let me go ahead and